Hello there. This is Abhivardhan from iSail, and we are live for this amazing episode of AI Now. I have been trying to have one episode on the AI ethics recommendations by UNESCO, and fortunately, we have a very special, a very special person from UNESCO. Of course, he is here in his personal capacity as an academic and a scholar of law and AI. So I'd like to introduce Maxim Karlyuk. Maxim is from Paris. He is, of course, working with UNESCO as a program specialist, and in his personal capacity as an academic, he will be explaining us about the nitty-gritties of the UNESCO's recent draft text on AI ethics recommendations. And there are so many aspects of AI ethics involved here that I must say that AI is a very omnipresent and omnipotent field. So the negotiation started between various countries who are the member states of UNESCO, and on the recommendations from transparency to explainability to gender issues to human rights to sovereignty to even certain business considerations which are involved in international law. I'm not sure if it covers private international law, but it definitely gives a very interesting and normative framework on the public international sphere when it comes to international law related culture, when it comes to AI. So, Maxim, welcome to AI Now, and it's a pleasure to have you on board. And so, my very first question will be about your academic career and your work in the field of AI and law, and of course, what inspires you to work in UNESCO?
Hi, very glad to be here. Thanks for having me here. So my name is Maxim Karlyuk. I work at the social and human sciences sector of UNESCO, where I work specifically on the recommendation on the ethics of AI that has been elaborated there. And yes, the ideas and opinions that I express here, they are my own, do not necessarily represent the view of UNESCO. In terms of my work in this field, so I came to UNESCO in January last year, basically as a consultant, specifically for the recommendation on the ethics of AI, right after the decision to draft it was taken by UNESCO. When I had to, my task was to develop an overall framework of possible ethical values, principles, and policies on AI ethics that are relevant to UNESCO's fields of competence and priorities, to identify possible structures, prepare the background document for the future recommendation, and to assist the preparation of and during the meetings of the ad hoc expert group, who actually was in charge of developing the first draft of the recommendation. So, and then I stayed with UNESCO to see through this process of elaboration and recommendation. So my background is in law, in fact. So I have an LLM and PhD in law with a sort of keen interest in public policy and philosophy, especially ethics, and how I came to this field of AI and AI ethics, combining it philosophy and law somehow. So, and prior to joining UNESCO, I was associate professor of law and was involved in a number of relevant initiatives, such as working groups of IEEE or coordinated research work for the Eurasian Economic Commission on developing regulatory models of cross-border data flows, which led eventually to draft international agreements in this field. Was involved in early stages in some drafting of the Russian national artificial intelligence development and some other things. So in terms of, I'm happy to expand on more of this work if you're interested. But then, in terms of what inspires me to work for UNESCO, it's probably this unique mandate and the combination of culture, science, education. And I mean, that is just beautiful. That what more would you want for fulfilling life? And the UNESCO approach, in fact, because it's pluralistic, it is multidisciplinary, which is very close to me. It is multicultural and it's multi-stakeholder. So this approach is really really great. And the work of my particular sector which is led by Gabriela Ramos, is about asking the right questions and producing science-based solutions to ensure impact, which is very important nowadays. And I'll just quote maybe the journal Nature editorial, in fact, that came out last year. It said, if UNESCO ceased to exist, the world would need to recreate it. So it just shows its value of this organization.
It's certainly a pleasure to have you, and I really like the introduction. I think the discussion will go as much fruitful as possible. So, to get something into context, as I said in the beginning, that we are going to talk about the draft text of the AI ethics recommendations, which are yet to be approved in a UNESCO conference recently, I think in November or October, if I'm right. Uh, my basic question is, what could be said as the proper, I would say, policy origins of this recommendation as to how did this inspiration come? We know that UNESCO and other UN agencies have been very much interested in the rapprochement of cultures issue as well as the advancement of disruptive technologies for a long time. And it's not just UNESCO; it is also ITU, and there are other UN organizations and agencies which are involved in it. But what makes UNESCO's approach special, and what is the very origin of the negotiations? So, if you can elaborate on that.
Yeah. Yes, so, well, historically, UNESCO has led global efforts to ensure that ethics is the compass for the conduct of science and application of emerging technologies. So, and in fact, within the United Nations system, it is UNESCO that has the mandate on ethics, including ethics of new technologies. So, in recent years, in fact, UNESCO has applied this mandate to such rapidly evolving fields as genetic engineering and neurotechnologies as examples. And it has unique global ethics consultative bodies to generate new insight on ethical challenges, such as the work of UNESCO's World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology, COMEST, and the International Bioethics Committee, IVC. So, and in fact, in the end, COMEST, this multidisciplinary scientific body, which is made up of independent experts, drafted the preliminary study on the ethics of AI, which was the basis for UNESCO to decide to pursue this recommendation on the ethics of AI. So, and the procedure eventually it went through is quite comprehensive and inclusive, because the first draft was developed by an ad hoc expert group composed of experts from diverse cultural backgrounds and all geographical regions. And it's linked to what I said at the beginning of this very unique mandate of UNESCO and its approach. They also leading scientists and professionals with extensive knowledge of the technological and ethical aspects of AI. So there was also a massive consultation, which garnered more than 50,000 comments from a diversity of stakeholders around the globe. And of course, member states provided their comments to the text, which were incorporated in the draft. And then the intergovernmental negotiations took place rather recently and were successful, although they were, very hard negotiations at certain topics, but they were eventually successful, and it will now be submitted, as you rightly said, to UNESCO General Conference for adoption in November this year. So, and in the end, the recommendation will be the first global normative act in this field, and it is. The draft document is very ambitious, but at the same time, it's policy friendly. It's a sort of blueprint to guide the development and use of AI technologies. It provides an overarching ethical framework that includes existing human rights while extending ethical reflection to incorporate new threats posed by digital technologies that are yet to be addressed in the current legal architecture that we have in nowadays. So this is sort of a short overview of the background.
That's quite interesting. So, let's begin with one of the key important concepts that is very figuratively present in the recommendations. And that one is very important because it is also close to Europe, and I think it will be very close to Asian countries in the coming future, which is the concept of human centered AI. So I've seen that the European Union mostly, and I'm not saying that only the European Union, but mostly the European Union has led the initiative on at least having research related negotiations as well as consultations on the aspect of what is human centered AI. So if you can explain about, like, so I have very simply two questions on this part. First question is, what is UNESCO's approach to human centered AI, and how has this approach been affirmed and transformed in the fields of international law related to culture and technology? If you can throw some light upon it.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the question. So the thing is that the way recommendation is structured, so basically it's it consists of sort of three main parts. So values, the principles, and then the policy actions. So, and within these foundational values that we have there, they have a role of necessary preconditions or prerequisites for principles and policy action to work, and in fact to ensure ethical AI. And the very first value is respect, protection, and promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms and human dignity. So, and it should be done throughout the whole life cycle of AI systems. And this is the basis for this human-centered approach to AI. And in fact, you find these human rights obligations throughout the text, throughout the whole recommendation. But it's an important thing that I would like to underline here, that the recommendation is not just about human-centeredness. And in fact, the reason is very simple. There are other considerations that escape this terminology. And in fact, we decided at early stages that we will not use this particular term even, precisely for that reason, because of other considerations which can be kind of escaping this particular term. So I'll just give you an example of environment. So we have, in particular, deliberately elevated environmental concerns to the level of values to make it a necessary precondition for all future AI work. So basically, it's the second value that goes next in the list. I mean, there is no hierarchy there. I'm just saying the way it is written now. So our at the very beginning, our analysis unfortunately showed that various documents proposing AI principles, they revealed that environmental impact dimension of AI technologies received less attention or were often even overlooked. So, but at the same time, we see that major AI methods currently employed are based on processing of ever-increasing amounts of data, computing power, which leads to increasing energy consumption and consequential impact on carbon emission, depletion of resources, and deterioration of the environment. Just an example with specific data extraction itself consumes nearly 10% of energy globally, and it is estimated that training just one large deep learning model produces lots of carbon dioxide, and someone even estimated it equals like 125 flights round trip flights even between New York and Beijing, which is a lot. I mean, it is true that algorithms are becoming more and more efficient, but nevertheless, from 2012 to 2018, computational power required for deep learning has increased 300,000%, which is not sustainable in the long run. So this is just one example how we try to make it broader than this human-centered AI approach. And that's why we have this value of environment and ecosystem flourishing. But we also go beyond. We also have a value of ensuring diversity and inclusiveness as a foundationally important aspect, and living in peaceful, just, and interconnected societies. So we see we bring this human-centeredness to all these other very important elements to us as organization, and we believe to the world. So this is just the way I wanted to address your question, not to be too focused on this human-centeredness.
Sure. I think you very well pointed out about human-centered AI, and of course, you gave a very interesting example. So, just a follow up before we move on to the next question, and a very simple follow up for understanding purposes. And this is kind of a personal question which I'm asking related to human-centric AI. So human-centric AI, of course, is related to rights centricity, which has been, of course, a very traditional part of international law, and it has evolved for, I would say decades, which is, it should be a right-centric approach, therefore human rights, and therefore human-centric AI has that component. The other component which I see also is that it is often associated with the need that, okay, fine, the AI should be compatible with human realities and human surroundings, and it should not be something like, okay, if we find there are two different universes or two different incompatible circles, and we can't have a Venn diagram where they can just collide and become unified, or at least we can say coherent to each other. So I think that, if I'm right, is the second approach also visible? I'm not talking about the recommendations, but I'm talking about the concept itself. Yeah.
No, this is a very great framing that you are doing, that you are making. The problem is that not everyone is making this kind of framing, and the human centeredness is understood mainly in this first approach, as I said. In order to avoid this kind of narrower understanding, that's why we went the way that I explained.
So that's really understandable, and I appreciate that. So let's go ahead with the next question. So the next question is very simple. It's about uh, the GPAI. So we know that UNESCO has gained an observer status in the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, which is also kind of a mini-lateral grouping, like other mini-lateral groupings on technology and disruptive economy. So, uh, how should we see the role of UNESCO as an observer? Of course, it's not like a member or something. It's an observer international organization, if we call it. So, how will it contribute in the multilateral efforts that GPAI already wishes to pursue?
Yeah. Yeah, indeed, we participate in GPA as an observer organization, and in fact, there is only another observer, which is a permanent observer, the OECD, where the secretariat of GPA is actually located. And we participate in the meetings of GPA, indeed. And the added value of UNESCO there is to bring a truly global perspective, because we have 193 members in UNESCO member states. And also the very things that I mentioned at the beginning, this approach of pluralistic, multidisciplinary, multicultural, multi-stakeholder elements to be present there. So, and generally UNESCO having observed the work that supports the work plan of GPA, we are happy to see that the ethical dimension has been reflected in several projects that we saw, as well as collaboration with civil society is also there. We encourage working groups, in fact, in developing and implementing their projects, take fully into account ethical and human rights considerations, including inclusivity, diversity, fairness, non-discrimination, which is central for ethical AI. And we're actually happy to see also that now much more attention is being paid to gender aspects, which is a big part of what we are addressing in our recommendation as well. So yes, so this is sort of the added values that UNESCO can bring to the table in GPA.
Amazing. So my next question is more about multilateralism and the way global approach to AI has been conceived. So very frankly, the question is the following: that is the recommendation consciously drafted in a manner with a question of very simple question that multilateral systems are not perfect and plurilateral options, where even in the case of international AI governance, must be kept on board in case the multilateral envisioning fails. So we know that, okay, fine, UNESCO is a multilateral organization, and even in technology, there are multilateral groupings, but of course, there are plurilateral options like bilateral, unilateral, or trilateral options which countries keep. I'm not saying that the GPAI is an example of plurilateralism because, again, it reflects the same multilateral leanings when it comes to structuralization or vision. But of course, it's like the Quad also, which is between India, US, Japan, and uh, Australia, which is also concerned with critical technology. It's multilateral, but it's a minilateral grouping because of the kind of level. It's not like UN or the EU. So, how do you see this? Because the plurilateralism will never go. It is a part of geopolitics as well as the international relations conundrum. So, in that sense, how do you see it emerging? If you can take in the context of the draft recommendations.
Yeah. Well, I can say that just no system is perfect, right? But the recommendation, in fact, tries to find a global, truly global common ground. And the draft text recognizes the existence of different ethical systems, right? Along with different, with cultural diversity around the world. At the same time, the goal here is of the text that we have produced. As with all basically normative instrument, is to find the ethical common ground that will allow all of the international community to advance in achieving the responsible use of AI technology. And also taking into account the UN human rights framework, which is global. And hence the recognition of the different ethical systems in the document and the need to have a dialogue with all of them, or otherwise pluralism, which is to avoid relativism and to ensure that the common basis in ethics is achieved. So, I mean, the short answer is we're not trying to, we're actually trying to bring everyone together under a common ground. And I think this is also the added value that we're introducing here. And also, in fact, the fact that this is a recommendation, which is not a binding document at this stage, but it's a still strong document, which is to which basically the world community can agree, and then proceed maybe to further stages. But I think this is basically the idea, to have to find a common ground for everyone.
That's quite interesting. Well, I agree that it's not binding, but we can, of course, so that since it's normative by its own goals and aspirations, I think a lot can be seen how countries fall in line with it accordingly, and of course how other multiple stakeholders of diverse nature, of course most of them are non-state actors in the definition, play a role. So of course civil societies and companies will have a very interesting role in the coming days, and of course years and months. So, since I used the word normative, my second question is about the normative framework of the recommendation. So, the question is quite simple. It is that the recommendation establishes that it is a means to engage and develop AI ethics and as I quote it, systemic, I would say systemic normative reflection. So, please explain how ethics as a dynamic basis for the normative evaluation and guidance of AI technologies must be understood, considering that the recommendation does not have an apparent ambition to provide one single definition of AI, and of course considering the fact that it approaches AI, and I like this approach because this is something which even the EU has tried to do it, that it approaches AI systems as systems which have the capacity to process data and information in a way that resembles intelligent behavior, and of course other aspects of reasoning, learning, perception, prediction, planning, or control. So I've quoted, of course, from the recommendation because of the nature of the question. So here you go.
Yeah. Well, so indeed, the draft text of the recommendation considers AI ethics as a dynamic basis of reflection that can guide societies in dealing responsibly with the known and unknown impacts of AI, aiming to ensure sort of protection of human dignity, of human rights, of well-being, and to prevent any possible harm. So, so technologies in general, and AI technologies in particular, they evolve very quickly, and it is not always easy to anticipate their impact. And that is why having a fixed set of principles or ethical codes is not enough. And an inclusive ethical reflection to ensure that these technologies continue to be used without infringing on human dignity or human rights is constantly needed. And the description of ethics as a dynamic process does not refer in this case to a change in values. On the contrary, it aims at ensuring that values are always respected and existing frameworks, including legal frameworks, are adapted if needed to ensure the protection of all of the dimensions of human dignity, human rights, while technologies advance. So ethics here is about making explicit the values that lie behind our policies, our choices, our actions, and applying this to human decision making. And basically ethics is about values, and it is the source of every decision and legal framework. And ethical frameworks provide a response in cases where regulation does not or cannot exist. So basically, AI technologies are always evolving, and there is a need to be constantly accompanied by ethics as a dynamic process to ensure that all of these interests that I mentioned and then human rights and human dignity are protected. So in terms of definition, indeed, we opted not to go for a fixed definition of AI precisely for the reasons that I mentioned, that it is constantly evolving technology. And moreover, there have been debates on the definition for more than half a century, and there was no conclusive result. And it was not really possible to solve this debate just like that for us. So basically, taking this into account, this is the approach we took. So yeah, if I responded to your question.
Yeah, sure, it was. I would say it was much like a complete answer. So, let's get ahead with the next question. It's kind of a jurisprudential question because I come from a legal background myself. So, my question is more from a legal perspective. So, generally, what is the trend is that okay, AI could be considered a legal entity or could not be considered a legal entity because of very simple reasons. When you say legal entity, it simply means either it is very autonomous, like any proper legal entity, like a company or anybody for that matter. It's a very basic 101 jurisprudential stuff. But from a juristic point of view, which is like, okay, fine, you make a policy or you make kind of a conceptual understanding, which of course the draft recommendations try to provide. Uh, do we see a trend that okay, fine, as I said, the recommendations are very clear that they don't wish to define AI, and therefore its definitive approach is very clear. As it states, and I quote, AI is something like information processing technologies. So if AI is information processing technologies, the EU says that AI is considered as an electronic legal personality. So, how do you see it, and does this legal understanding have an evolving basis? So,
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, this is actually a very fascinating topic for me as well as also having a legal background. I mean, and there are lots of discussions, absolutely, from opposing directions on that. The thing is that there is a clear stance in the recommendation on this issue right now, which basically says the following: that AI systems should not be given legal personality. So it's explicitly said in the recommendation. In fact, there is a strong consensus during. I mean, it was already there before the negotiations because experts who drafted the first draft, they debated this, decided to go this way, and we saw a strong consensus among member states negotiating the document to uphold this. And to uphold it basically for the reasons of ensuring the principle of human oversight and determination. And of course, not everyone wanted to close this door completely because, it's debatable issues still not resolved, etc. But this is where the member states kind of concluded that this is the best way forward. So, yeah, this kind of a short response in this regard.
no issues with that.
Although with all the merit, I mean, the discussion is super fascinating. I absolutely agree. I mean,
That's great. So, my next question is the following. Very simply speaking, that does the recommendation acknowledge that AI by all means is becoming or being made omnipresent and omnipotent? Omnipresent is like present everywhere or present in every domain. It's like that. And omnipotent means that howsoever in a very all comprehensive sense or manner, it has it has a potential to act, and it has a potential to make things happen, or I would say work by a design and default approach. And this design and default, this phrase comes from the EU approach to GDPR, basically, because it's seen in privacy by design and default. Design simply means that it's the infrastructure, how you structure it, and how you ensure transparency and other factors in ethics. And default is generally like a switch on or off button. You just have something very basic, which is to be there as a safeguard. So, considering that, at least by glancing at the express need to focus on every stage of AI's development, which the recommendation definitely focuses on, and the all comprehensive democratization, even if it is within few big tech companies, or even if it is decentralized under MSMEs and other creative people and content creators, or I would say, let's not say content creators, let's say developers and other people in the IT field. Uh, what do you think about it? Does it focus on the aspect of omnipresence and omnipotence when it comes to AI? I mean, the recommendation, does it focus on that? Yeah.
well, it definitely does, in a sense that it recognizes that the AI systems are around us more and more, which has both benefits and risks. Which is, this is absolutely recognized by by the recommendation, and it is basically the raison d'être of starting this work. And it is actually, I mean, evident as with previous technological revolutions, AI has also the potential to transform the future for the better through new tools. Like just to take the recent example of how AI generated some of the earliest alerts about the COVID outbreak, even before it was confirmed, by just routinely scanning hundreds or thousands of governmental and media data sources, etc., in multiple languages, which is not possible to do for humans. So this analytical capacity helped to accelerate discovery of vaccines that we have now, and understanding protein structure and going beyond COVID. So and these self-learning algorithms, these smart machines, are playing increasingly more important role in our efforts also to recover from the current crisis, like digital platforms where we are now, or infrastructures. They have been brought in to keep our economies, schools, and societies going. At the same time, the same tools can bring downside risks and challenges. They can come from what you were saying, concentration of these technologies in certain hands, let's say, or just in private sector or something like that, in certain regions. These negative impacts can emanate from deliberate actions, side effects of poor design, or impact of the surroundings of the system, because they are self-learning in most of the cases. So, so malicious use here is more evident, and but also there are unintended failures with a very long track record, like self-learned biases, or in the development of algorithms, or the market crashes that we already experience based on intelligent trading software, accidents, self-driving cars, etc., or chatbots that they're doing embarrassing stuff online. So there are many sides to it. So that is why it's important to focus on this both aspect, benefits and risks, and also on the whole life cycle, because that's actually what we do in the recommendation. We are not talking about abstract AI system. We're talking about specific stages of the life cycle, and we're making sure that our values, principles, and policy actions, they are covering the whole life cycle, of course, where it is relevant. So and to ensure that we avoid these possible risks while securing the benefits. So did you want to ask something else? Maybe I missed something in your question.
Okay, so I'll just repeat the question again. The question was very simply on the question point that, so it is considered that AI is omnipresent and omnipotent. Omnipresence is like you're present everywhere. Omnipotent is your potential in every domain wherever you go. That is what is considered for AI. Since we are saying that, uh, from understanding that there will be monopolistic big tech companies as well as decentralized MSMEs and developers and other communities from tech background, does the recommendation acknowledge that AI is both omnipresent and omnipotent when it comes to by structure as well as default features? Because yeah, so that was the question.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Of course, given that specific mandate of UNESCO, it's not going in deeply into this economic concentration things, but to in particular the ones that we mentioned as an example. But at the same time, we do cover, because we have a chapter on economy and labor was also put together, and we have a specific policy action with regarding to competition, and to ensure that yes, exactly, to ensure that there is no this monopolization taking place, or I mean, to address these issues in this field, because this is indeed also recognized in the recommendation. So yes, so this is also addressed in the recommendation, because you see, because we see ethics as basically all encompassing. And this is also, I mean, we understand ethics and recommendation very broadly, and that's why these aspects are also addressed in the recommendation.
That's great. So the next question is more about two kinds of impact assessments. So in AI ethics, there is one thing known as ethical impact assessment, and I see that the recommendation mentions about ethical impact assessment. I'm not sure if I would find the same when it comes to risk impact assessment. So, if you can elaborate about the EIA in the
Yeah.
recommendation, which is the ethical impact assessment, and of course, when it comes to challenges related to risks related to AI, how does the recommendation hold its ground?
Yeah. So the thing is that indeed we have these two very specific tools that I introduced in the recommendation, which are ethical impact assessment and readiness methodology. And the reason for that is basically because the recommendation is not just about values and principles, but it's also about how to put them in practice. So this is this very practical, practice-oriented document, and these tools are to help with that. So ethical impact assessment aims to assess, monitor, and evaluate ethical impacts of AI systems on societies and take action. So it will cover all life cycle of AI systems and assess both the direct impact on human societies and environment, as well as indirect impact on long-term and long-term effect. So, and we will be developing basically methodology for that and the tools in the UNESCO way that I mentioned before, making sure it's multidisciplinary, multicultural, etc., etc. So, and then the readiness assessment methodology is sort of a readiness benchmarking tool to identify the status of countries in terms of preparedness to implement the recommendation, in terms of scientific, technological, economic, educational, legal, infrastructural, societal, cultural, and other dimensions. And its readiness here is understood as a dynamic status, and countries will be able to use the methodologies, this methodology to track their advancements across these different dimensions. So these are the things which are indeed kind of practical things in order to make recommendation happen, in practice, to be to help states to implement it in practice.
That's indeed a very interesting point made, I must say. So, now my question is a very specific one, and this could be a very technical question, but I'm still asking this because I believe they are also mentioned in their recommendation throughout and they must be discussed. So, if you can explain about, and I'm quoting it, the equitable access to developments and knowledge in the field of AI, and the sharing of benefits with particular attention to the needs and contributions of LMICs, LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS. If you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, sure. This is actually this is a very important point, but these abbreviations are not probably not clear to everyone. So just to clarify, these are specific terminologies that have been used in the UN system. So LMICs, these are low and middle income countries. LDCs are least developed countries. LLDCs are there are specific countries which are landlocked developing countries, and seeds are small island developing states. So these are how to say, basically developing countries which we recognized. So in a sense, we recognize them that the digital economy presents important societal, economic, environmental challenges and opportunities for benefit sharing, especially for these countries that I mentioned. So, and as part of its global nature, the recommendation pays particular attention to these countries to ensure that they are not left behind in developments in the field of AI. It is linked to what we discussed earlier, that these technologies are quite concentrated. And for instance, we know that about 200 companies, they make about 80% of all innovations in AI, or that geographical distribution, as you know, is not much better because we have world's like a dozen of world's most important AI firms are based either in US, in China, Japan, and the EU, and pretty much that would be it. So, so this is just one of the concerns. And we have a specific policy area chapter on the development and international cooperation, which addresses, in particular, concerns of developing countries, where member states should work through international organizations to provide platforms for international cooperation on AI for development, including by contributing expertise, funding, data, domain knowledge infrastructure, and facilitate multi-stakeholder collaboration to tackle challenges and development problems, especially for LMICs and in particular LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS. So, and they should, I mean, also member states should work to promote international collaboration on AI research and innovation, including research and innovation centers and networks that promote greater participation. But not only participation, what is important, also leadership of researchers from these countries. So it's important to bring them to these discussions, to this fora, to participate fully, to be included fully in those discussions and development. So this is basically what we mean by the quotation you mentioned.
Indeed. Since we have come a little bit to the issue of environment, my next question is related to environment law. And I would say, very frankly, international environment law. So we know that the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities is emerging, and developing countries also come up with it. India has also done it. Since I belong to India, I am from India, so I would say that. But still, my question is more on that concept, that whether the recommendation acknowledges the principle in theory as well as practice, since you've stated that it's a practice centric regulation. And even I agree to it, because much of its understanding is very mature from X field to Y field. And of course, I would like to know more about it as to, when it comes to AI ethics, does it deal with common but differentiated responsibilities? So, yeah.
So the response here will be also rather short, because this specific concept, it was discussed shortly during the negotiations by member states, and I can say that it did not find much support among states, and in the end, it was not included in the text. And in fact, I must say, I don't know, probably is the how to say. The maturity of it in this field, probably because it didn't find really much support to be included in the document at this point. So maybe it's something that will come, but at this point, yeah, that's the situation.
Indeed. So, one kind of an academic and policy question as a follow up to it. If it should be included, how it should have been. I'm not saying that, of course, it should have been right now. Of course, there must be some reasons. And of course, this is understandable because there are concerns among countries accordingly. But if it is necessary from an academic and policy point of view, practically, then how it should be included and how it should be understood. Of course, not in this recommendation, but maybe in future texts in an indirect manner or direct manner. So, if you can elaborate on that.
Sorry, you're still about talking about the same concepts.
Yes.
Look, there's really it's really hard to for me to comment on that, because I didn't do really research on this concept specifically in application to this field. Indeed, it's very much elaborated and related to the environmental um, law area, and specifically, actually, it was the proposal to include this recommendation was also in the environmental chapter of the recommendation, more specifically. So, I mean, again, this is something to be still to be developed and evolved in academic literature, and then probably it can find its more support in intergovernmental fora. I'm just I would just again just leave it for the more academic discussion for now.
Sure, no issues with that. I mean, I appreciate the comments, of course. So, now I will talk a little bit about privacy in the recommendations. So, if you can elaborate about the privacy by design approach which this recommendation has tried to deal with, and how different is it from the European Commission's approach? And why am I saying European Commission is because the European Commission has taken the and this is my understanding, I may be wrong on that. Currently, for now, the European Commission has taken a more mature approach when it comes to privacy by design and both privacy by default. However, I believe the recommendation is directly stated privacy by design. So, yeah, it's kind of a comparative analysis, but of course, in a very simple manner, if you can elaborate upon that.
Yeah. Look, on the level of principles, actually, privacy plays quite a big role in the recommendation. It is recognized on the level of principles because we have the principle of right to privacy, so we recognize as a right to privacy, and data protection is also taking part of it, part of this principle. So there is right to privacy, comma, and data protection principle that we have. So basically, what it says is that algorithmic systems require adequate privacy impact assessments, in fact, which also includes societal and ethical considerations of their use. Privacy by design indeed is specifically mentioned in this regard because it even says that an innovative use of the privacy by design approach. And AI actors, basically the recommendation says that AI actors need to ensure that they are accountable for the design and implementation of AI system in such a way that it ensures that personal information is protected throughout the life cycle of the AI system. So this is sort of the level of principles how this is approached. And then there is also level of policy actions where we have a separate data policy, and there address the member states. The recommendation says that they should put in place appropriate safeguards to protect the right to privacy in accordance with international law, and including addressing concerns such as surveillance in particular, so it highlights this. So member states, they also should adopt or enforce, if they already have those, legislative frameworks that provide appropriate protection, which is compliant with international law. And member states should also strongly encourage all AI actors, which includes companies, to apply privacy by design in their systems. So there is quite a strong statements on that. But in the end, privacy basically should be respected, protected, promoted, and this should be, as our recommendation is talking about, they should be at all stages, because this is the concern at various stages, from the research to development to further implementation. They should be respected, protected, and promoted. So there is a very strong emphasis on that. And you're right that indeed EU is very strong on this aspect, and in particular, EU member states during negotiations, they were particularly strong about these aspects of the recommendation as well.
That's great. So we have quite discussed about privacy. So let us discuss about explainability, auditability, and transparency. I could have said also traceability. But I believe within the umbrella framework of explainable AI, as always said, all these concepts like auditability, transparency, and traceability come in. So, what new and what I would say, I would say in a very simple manner, how much practical and how much new approach towards explainable AI do we see in this recommendation? If you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, I'll try. I don't know how much of that would be innovative, but there are quite a bit of innovations actually in different parts of the recommendation in terms of specifically transparency and explainability issues. So, the thing is, these are essential preconditions to ensure the specifically respect and protection and promotion of human rights. And ethical principles, because transparency is necessary for relevant national or international liability regimes to work effectively. And lack of transparency could also undermine the possibility of effectively challenging decisions based on outcomes produced by AI systems, and may infringe on rights like a fair trial, to a fair trial, or to have any effective remedies in the end. So yeah, so these are important aspects. So at the same time, we recognize that while efforts need to be made to increase transparency and explainability, levels of transparency and explainability should always be appropriate to the context and impact, because there might be a need to balance between transparency and explainability and other principles. Because the transparency and explainability is one of the principles in the recommendation, but there are also others. And principles such as privacy, safety, security, they also come into play. So here there should be a balance. For individuals, it's specifically important because people should be fully informed. Basically, that's what the recommendation says. People should be fully informed when a decision is informed by or is made on the basis of AI algorithms, including when it affects their safety or human rights. And in such cases, they should have the opportunity to request explanatory information from the relevant AI actor or public sector institution. So for the individuals, they should also be able to access the reasons for a decision affecting their rights and freedoms, and have the option of making submissions to specific, responsible staff members of private company or public sector institution to be able to review and correct the decisions. And in the end, AI actors that use AI system, they should inform users when a product or service is provided directly or with the assistance of AI systems in a proper and timely manner. So you see, it's basically quite specific rules that the recommendation stipulates. So in terms of explainability, which refers to making intelligible and providing insights into the outcome of AI systems, it's also beyond that, because it's also about understandability of the input, output, and the functioning of algorithms, or even algorithm building blocks, and how they contribute to the outcomes of the system. So, and they are pretty much related, let's say. So yeah, so this is basically, I just gave some example, but they are quite, let's say, comprehensively unpacked in the recommendation.
So I am left with just two questions, and then I might ask a simple question, which is a surprise question. But again, I have two questions left. So one question is about the focus of the recommendation on gender. Now we know that equality of opportunity and equality of outcome are things which are on a policy level very, very interlinked concepts. And even in practicality, we see the trends, whether through statistics, whether through other aspects, or even whether through the legal approaches and so forth in various countries, whether developed, developing, and so on. So, how is the dynamics of opportunity outcome of equality has been dealt by the recommendation? If you can give some insights on that.
Yeah, so as I said, gender is a big part of the recommendation, and basically is because there is a separate even policy area developed, because gender is actually one of the two global priorities of UNESCO, gender equality, and because of the specific concern that have been emerging in this regard in the field of AI, and examples are multiple. Because, for instance, women participation in many in fields related to AI is quite low. Like, for instance, only 22% of AI professionals globally are female. Like, less than 14% of AI papers are authored by women. And also, if you look at international conferences on the issues, also the percentage is very, very low. So also gender biases are also present in AI. This is a very common thing and well-researched thing. So algorithms produced on the biased data lead to spreading or reinforcing harmful gender stereotypes as well. So, etc., etc. So there are many problems, and there are actually a specific example where companies try to implement algorithms in their work, like Amazon. They had a AI recruiting tool saying that, which ended up discriminating against women due to its use of male-dominated data sets. So, and then in the end, they had to even shut down this system. So, also there was some studies saying that prominent facial recognition software. They also have higher error rates when they're presented with pictures of women. And if we even combine, we take women with darker skin, that's even worse in terms of recognition. So there are many issues in this regard. In terms of your specific, the issue you raised in terms of this dynamic opportunity outcome, it's not directly, there is no direct focus on that in the recommendation. What the recommendation says basically is that member states should ensure that the potential for digital technologies and artificial intelligence to contribute to achieving gender equality is fully maximized. And they must ensure that the human rights and fundamental freedoms of girls and women and their safety and integrity are not violated at any stage of AI system life cycle. So basically using these tools to ensure that we achieve the SDGs and specifically in this field, and also highlighting that there is a real problem in this area, so underlying. So, for instance, some states were saying that in their countries they do not have this problem, which is sometimes actually true, because sometimes like education enrollment of women in these fields are actually sometimes in some countries are actually higher than of male, which is true. But but these are more exceptions than rules. So we're just highlighting this problem and ensuring that member states pay attention to these problems.
Great. So I have a last question with regards to the recommendation, and it is about, I would say, cooperation between different international organizations. So the question is quite simple. There are certain organizations which have their own policy stake when it comes to this recommendation in the future of AI ethics. UNESCO is, of course, one of the key bodies, and I would say very frankly, the principal UN agency with respect to AI ethics. So, how much this recommendation would inspire the World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology, or COMEST, and other two organizations, which is the International Bioethics Committee and the Intergovernmental Bioethics Committee. So, of course, I understand that bioethics is an emerging field, and bioethics is also not. I don't know if it's closely, but to some affirmative level, it is associated with AI. So, in that case, how does the recommendation imbibe aspects of, and I would say very frankly, avenues of cooperation among them and UNESCO? So, if you can elaborate on that.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned this specific organization, because they are all linked to UNESCO, because they are basically working on, although they are independent, but they are working in basically as consultative bodies of UNESCO. And in fact, I must say that it's not like the recommendation inspires their work, but they inspired the recommendation. That's what when I mentioned at the beginning the historical role of UNESCO in developing ethical approaches in various fields actually was done through these bodies in many cases. So they actually inspired this recommendation in the first place, and that is one of the reasons why UNESCO got the mandate as well, because of their excellent work. So in fact, they are working, but indeed there is also the reverse, because the recommendation also inspires their work and further development, because these institutions, they look like at future steps, and they are working now on very interesting fields now. They're developing work on ethical implications of Internet of Things, ethical issues of neurotechnologies, principle of protecting future generations. So these are some of the things they are focusing on now. But also, it's true that there are many initiatives where also dealing with AI around the world, both on UN level and in the UN system, within the UN system and beyond. And particularly in the UN system, UNESCO is involved in this implementation of the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation, and UNESCO is one of the co-champions of the recommendation on the part on AI. And also recently there was on the UN system level, and particularly the high-level committee on programs, an interagency working group on AI has been created, and it is being co-led by UNESCO and ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. And the aim of this interagency working group is to combine the ethical and technological parts of UN, ethical being the basically UNESCO part, ITU being the technological part, to provide a solid foundations for current and future system-wide, UN system-wide efforts on AI with a view to ensure respect for human rights and accelerating the progress of on achieving the sustainable development goals. Yeah, so, but indeed, there is a lot of collaboration going on, and we hope even more will happen in the future as soon as the recommendation is adopted. And yeah, we're looking forward to combine our forces, because this is a global issue. This is not something like should be covered by only a certain group of states or group of stakeholders, but it's really global issue with global impacts, and this should be indeed done in cooperative manner on a global level.
That's really interesting to know. I think I must have not phrased my question correctly, but I think I should have said that the organization inspired the recommendation. My point was just like, okay, fine, that's the case. Let's just switch it off. So, anyways, so my last question, it's a very frank and tailor-made question, not something which is related to the recommendation, but yeah, of course, related to AI ethics. Um, let's assume that in the general conference in October, November, the recommendation is approved, and I hope that it does, because of course, even if it is not binding, it has a lot of policy relevance from a reflective basis. Of course, documents like these under international law are suggestive by nature, because of course they are not, positivist and all of that. They are not binding like that, but still, they have a reflective nature. We can see in various fields of international law that all of these documents of declaratory as well as reflective nature have had a lot of policy impact which countries have shown. Whether it is the ILC, whether it is UNESCO, whether it is any other body. Considering that, what is something, what things, or I would say, what legal and policy issues are there which have not been covered, or let me rephrase, should be covered or should have been covered or should be covered in future when it comes to AI ethics, if any future document in cognizance and in consonance with this recommendation comes in. So, what are your views on that?
No, absolutely. You given the specifics of the document and everything, not it's not covering absolutely everything. It's pretty much impossible to do that in any single document. There is one very specific issue that has been consciously avoided in the document, and which is super extremely important on the global level as well, which is weaponization and AI in this field, and for simple reasons, because there is a different fora to dealing with that, and they have strong discussions which will be going on still for many years. So this is something that we did not cover in the recommendation. First of all, we don't have mandate for that in this recommendation. Secondly, it's such a complex issue which in my view, it should be dealt with in a separate document, not covered in necessarily in this one, and to be tackled like really in the right way, because there is lots of interest, really strong interest going on there, lots of hard negotiations ongoing and will be going on. So yeah, so this is one specific issue which I believe absolutely should be addressed on the global level. But there are other fora that are dealing with that, and this is not for UNESCO to deal with. So I would say this is the most important thing that's, how to say, which is kind of not addressed by the recommendation. Otherwise, as I said, ethics is understood in the recommendation quite broadly, and is applied to many fields. As I mentioned, for instance, we even have this chapter on economy and labor, which is also addressed in the recommendation, because there are lots of ethical issues related to that. So I would say that, and the thing that we discussed with you today about this uh, common differentiated responsibility, this is not addressed in the recommendation. Maybe, again, depending on the outcomes of the academic discussions and intergovernmental considerations, maybe this can be addressed at some point as well. We will see. So, but that's the issue that, I mean, specifically the weaponization is particularly clearly not part of this document.
That's indeed great. So I'd like to thank you for coming up for this amazing discussion. It was kind of informative as well as, I would say, for anyone who would do this Bing watch, of course, after the session is done, the person will learn a lot, of course. And for those who are interested in AI ethics and law from India, of course, who, which is, of course, our main viewer base, those also will love this discussion at all costs. So I must say that it's an amazing contribution from your side. Thank you so much for giving us your precious time for the discussion. And we await you in future sessions and future podcasts in case we come up with anything or we plan with something, of course, based on your time.
Oh, thank you very much. It was my pleasure to have this discussion. And yeah, I mean, if I'm open if there are more questions or anything from the listeners, viewers, happy to reply as well. So yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and I'm happy that you are addressing it and interested in our work. And we hope that we bring really truly bring added value, because this field indeed is developing really fast, and we need to act as soon as possible. So yeah, thank you very much. Has been great.
Certainly. So, with this, we end this episode of AI Now. We will be coming up with a very interesting episode of Global Hint with Dr. Robert Lemon, who will be discussing about the Second World War and the role of countries like India, Japan, and Burma. It's a very interesting book on geopolitics. So, we will be doing that on 14th August. In the meanwhile, we have the Indian moot on artificial intelligence in law, whose curtain raiser and the final of the match will be coming live on IGP. So stay there with us as I would say, a very busy week is going to come. At the same time, there will be the third anniversary of Internationalism Global Podcasts. So we will be coming up with some interesting surprise episode. I'm not going to tell much about it, but as you see us on social media and YouTube, please await following updates. And with that, I would say never be the same. Know the world beyond. Thank you.